They told him to get up, saying the seat wasn't made for him. However, he did not stand up. Additionally, they said that the seat was not designed to accommodate him in any way. An individual of African American descent who is currently assigned to a seat in the business class section and is not making any statements to the general public at this time. To reveal the true nature of a constructed system, one only needed to be present in it. There was a main flight attendant who was wearing bright red lipstick and had pale skin. She was located inside the cockpit. She wore bright red lipstick. She positioned her finger a few inches away from his face and said, "Passengers like you don't have a ticket for this section." Behind him on the row, a white CEO smirked with a disdainful grin on his face. She then continued her statement. This was spoken by her when she was pointing her finger. At the moment when the attendant announced, "Passengers like you do not have a ticket for this section," the entire cabin fell into utter silence and froze. No one spoke up in response to the situation because they believed a black man did not belong in their everyday lives. People did not raise their voices because of this particular reason. However, when the sound of heavy footfall reverberated off the runway, a convoy of military trucks came up directly next to the jet, and the person they had come to welcome was him. He was the one they had come to welcome. It was he whom they had come to greet and take a look at. Upon their arrival, it became evident that he was the individual they had come to meet. The president, sitting calmly in 2A, did not speak at any point during the entire conversation. He remained silent throughout the entire conversation. He did not become irritated. He did not raise his voice. He simply stared at them, and he offered them the choice to bend their heads regardless of whether or not they agreed with what he was saying. He did not demonstrate any signs of agitation. This story is about how the world forms opinions about you based on your appearance before even thinking about talking to you. The color of a person's skin is not the only thing that is considered while determining the theme of this narrative. It was a cold, brisk morning at Orly Airport in Paris, and the sun had not yet come through the defrosted windows. The airport was located in the early hours of the morning. The entrance to the boarding lounge was made by a guy of color who entered in a deliberate and methodical manner, accompanied by the gentle rumbling of rolling baggage. The noise of rolling baggage was heard in the background as he moved. His gray coat had lost its color, his sneakers were worn out, and he was carrying a canvas rucksack that was basic gray and did not have any logos on it. He was dressed in an unremarkable manner. He wore each and every one of these products alone. He carried it out with a composed demeanor, effortlessly draping it over his shoulder. In addition to the fact that he did not appear to be in a rush, he did not appear to be looking around, he was not accompanied by anyone, and he did not appear to be in a hurry. Nobody seemed to be paying special attention to him. In his own way, he was nothing more than another African nomad who was traveling alone in the shadows that the world so frequently casts over those who are similar to him. He sat in the passenger seat of the vehicle. Following this, he took out his phone, opened his email, and started reading in a manner that was serene, unruffled, and utterly silent. He quietly took a seat on the plastic bench near the window. He made the decision to sit near the window. Security personnel were approaching, but none stopped them. This was what they were approaching. During the time that they were discussing new mining businesses that were going to be established in Central Africa, they were laughing loudly in the distance. The group of executives from the corporation, they ignored the man by the window, who seemed irrelevant. They ignored him because he seemed uninteresting. On the other hand, they were wholly unaware of the fact that his name was Ibrahim Traoré and that he held the position of president of Burkina Faso. It was their ignorance that won out. He had just returned from a high-level summit that had taken place in Brussels, Belgium, on the subject of economic sovereignty and gold mining rights for the African continent. The gathering had been discussing the topic of economic sovereignty. The idea of economic sovereignty had been the subject of one of the gathering's discussions. This plane was transporting a leader back to their apartment without their entourage. Ibrahim Traoré believes that actual power does not need to be displayed. Rather, it is important for it to be placed in the hands of an individual who is able to wield it in a cool and collected manner while maintaining their composure. A man with a stride that was hurried and a face that was flushed scarlet with wrath surged into the area that was designated for priority boarding services. He proceeded to enter the area with determination. He also had a reddened face to the point of embarrassment. The only sounds that could be heard within the limits of the cabin were either of these two things, with the exception of the click of high heels and the rumbling of rolling luggage. They were the only sounds that could be heard. In spite of the fact that the gate leading to the boarding area had only recently been opened, the atmosphere in the vicinity of it was still relatively soothing. The boarding group's announcements were heard throughout the neighborhood for the same reason that they would be heard on any other day. They were precisely the same as they would be on any other day. This was the reason why they were heard. Luke Morel, who was 55 years old and the chief executive officer of an energy conglomerate that operates in more than 12 African countries, wore a blue suit that was tailored to his body, a silk tie that was a deep crimson color, and glasses with silver frames. He was also wearing a pair of glasses. Additionally, he was adorned with a pair of glasses. Furthermore, he wore a pair of glasses as a form of personal accessory. By virtue of the fact that his nose was completely straight and pointed, he was perfectly balanced on it. At this point, he was completely balanced. He possesses a nose that was fashioned in the most perfect manner possible. After being informed that all of the seats in the business class section had already been reserved, he stood in the airport as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. He appeared to be in a state of shock. At that very moment, the prejudice was accompanied by a number of individuals, including the chief executive officer, the flight attendant, and the prejudice herself. Nevertheless, in spite of the fact that I am a big partner of Burkina Faso, you need me to make a reservation for a seat in the economy class portion of the airplane? Who was the person who was accountable for making the decision that created such a humorous situation? An email was forwarded, a phone call was made, and a legal threat was delivered as if it were a piece of ordinary business. All of these activities were carried out on multiple occasions. A short period of time was sufficient for each and every one of these things to take place. As soon as the ground crew started to feel concerned, they started using walkie-talkies to speak with one another. This was done in order to alleviate their anxiety. They eventually came to the conclusion that they needed to make a phone call to the head flight attendant and encourage her to handle the situation in a discreet manner, in the event that someone could be persuaded to give up their seat. This insight came about at some point in time. During that very same instant, Lucian made her entrance from a distance, and she commanded attention not because of her authority, but rather because of the attitude that she carried along with her toward the circumstance. During the time that Lucien Arnault was 48 years old, he was employed by a multinational airline as a senior flight attendant. He was of the Caucasian ethnicity, in addition to having broad shoulders and a large body. He was also of Asian descent. It came as a complete and utter surprise to him when he got at the airport that a VIP traveler was in dire need of a seat. He was completely taken aback by this information. With each step that she took, the floor of the cabin began to sink slightly beneath her feet. She landed with a hefty stride, and the floor began to sink slowly beneath her feet. It was because of her landing that this occurred. An additional factor that contributed to the impression that her lipstick was the only thing that claimed control of the cabin was the fact that her face was covered in a heavy coating of makeup and that her lips were painted a daring shade of red. The fact that her lips were painted a bold shade of red contributed to the formation of this image. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a bun with amazing precision, and each individual strand of hair was pulled back with the same amount of effort as she was using to bring her nerves back. Her hair was pulled back into a bun. A bun was what she was wearing. The least amount of time that was feasible for her to enter the business class portion of the aircraft was the amount of time that she spent doing so. Neither the passenger list nor the identities of the passengers were investigated by her, nor did she make any queries about the passengers' identities. The gaze of her eyes continued to travel all over the room until it eventually arrived at row 2, where Ibrahim Traoré was sitting. When she reached that moment, she was finally able to bring her attention back to reality. Dressed in a plain gray coat, he stealthily read the news on his phone through the coat's cover. He held his phone in his hand. During that moment, he was wearing a jacket. He wore simple clothes devoid of any ornamentation. Before that point, he had been completely unaware of the fact that he had suddenly become a target. He had been completely unaware of this truth until that moment. A fleeting glance was cast by Lucian in the direction of the boarding card that she was carrying. He glanced at the boarding card she held for a brief moment. She placed a restriction that the person in question should not give the impression of being someone who ought to be traveling in the business class portion of the aircraft. This was a requirement she imposed. This was her sole requirement at that moment. In addition to the fact that she did not inquire about confirmation, she also did not believe that it was important to provide an explanation. At the moment that Lucian made his appearance in front of Ibrahim, she did not inquire about his name, nor did she check the system. She didn't carry out any of these actions. It was not her responsibility to analyze the system. Due to a scheduling issue, we need to change the seating arrangements. Would you be able to sit in on the economy? Ibrahim's manner did not reflect any signals of annoyance or surprise when he looked up. Rather, it was just calm and collected as he gazed up. He stealthily slipped his ticket under his coat and held it in one hand while extending it with the other. Without making a sound, he accomplished this task. He was able to accomplish this although he was not a prominent figure in the community. Acquiring the second seat in the business class ticket requires an exceptionally high level of priority. Her eyes betrayed her. They held something that was blatantly scornful of her, although she made an effort to retain her professionalism as she turned and walked away from the situation. On the other hand, she was completely unaware of the fact that the individual whom she had just evaluated, based on a faded gray coat, was in possession of the authority to obstruct a gas project that was worth 300 million euros and that her country had been representing. She had just utilized the existence of an old gray cloak as a basis for her evaluation of the individual. Although she did not utter a single word, she looked back at him with a gaze that communicated the question, "How could someone like you be sitting here?" In a span of less than 2 seconds, Lucian gave her a fleeting glance, and then she returned that attention to him. Lucian seemed to be surprised by her reaction. She returned the ticket with a small nod, but she did not express gratitude or offer an apology. She did not express gratitude or make an apology. The path that Lucian was traveling in order to arrive at seat 2A in the room became more difficult. When she arrived, she was greeted by the same visage, which continued to be calm and uncommunicative throughout the entire encounter. Through the maintenance of an upright posture and the clean folding of her hands in front of her, she displayed a manner of conduct that was both professional and civilized, a demonstration of behavior that is both courteous and professional by nature. When Ibrahim looked up and found himself looking into her eyes, he did not display any signs of happiness or anxiety. He was completely unaffected by the situation. The manner in which he carried himself was one of total and utter calmness. By asking, "Why was I chosen?" While speaking in a tone that was as soft as air, he experimented with a new method of communication. He made use of this alternative approach to accomplish his goals. It was clear that Lucian had attracted her attention to the fact that he had inquired, as she had not anticipated that Lucian would inquire, let alone inquire in such a manner. She had not anticipated that Lucian would investigate. Lucian's question was not something she had anticipated at all. She responded by saying, "Oh, it's nothing personal, sir," and she attempted to keep her composure and self-control during the entire conversation. This technical modification will serve the purpose of providing a seating layout within the cabin that is more balanced. To put it another way, this modification will serve the objective. In spite of the fact that he continued to glance at her, Ibrahim gave his head a slight inclination in the opposite direction. In spite of the fact that he continued to look at her, this was the result she received. For this reason, you should query of each and every person, "Why was I chosen?" when this is considered. In point of fact, I am not the only one who feels this way. During the time that the cabin was being prepared, it abruptly slipped into a state of utter quiet, giving the impression that it had been completely devoid of any air during the construction process. Before turning his back on the situation, Lucian attempted to stifle his chuckle and a grin in order to keep himself from turning his back on it. He did this to prevent himself from rejecting the scenario. After that, he distanced himself from the difficult situation that he was in. She uttered something in a whisper, making sure that her voice was low enough to prevent it from being overheard, yet loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear what she had to say. "People like that always make things more complicated," she observed to me. Her friend peered over her eyes and narrowed her brows as she remarked, "He appears to be so ordinary, but there is something about him that no one dares touch." The interaction took place 2 seats behind her. A nurse from Africa drew close to her partner and muttered, "We have no idea who that man is." Her companion also responded in a whisper. Lucian opened the passenger manifest after a few periods of time had passed, and while she was doing so, she traced her finger along the list, seeking any markings that might be present for the passengers. At this point, no one asked for names or politely requested help. Only those with the right skin color were offered to help with the seating realignment. As soon as Lucian began his search for further candidates to transfer, he noticed that all of them shared a common characteristic. They were reserved, they had dark skin, and no one else was significant enough to notice them but themselves. This was the only thing they had in common with each other. This time, Ibrahim simply rose to his feet, as he had been doing throughout the entire conversation, without any sudden or surprising movements. His tone of voice was not elevated. He did not display any signs of anger, and he did not demonstrate any signs of being in control of the situation. Rather than doing so, he simply remained there and peered at Lucian as if he were peeping right into something that she had never been required to address before. He did not do anything else. No one in the cabin could make eye contact with him for a long time. He was the only person in the cabin who was able to retain this look. As she stood once more in front of Ibrahim, she had just coerced a young black man into migrating to the economy without providing any reason or expressing any sadness. She had done this without expressing any regret. She had just forced Lucien to do something when he returned for the second time. Aside from the fact that she did not converse, she did not offer an invitation to him, and she did not urge that he go in a manner that was not obvious to others. Instead of doing anything else, she simply stood there with a look that suggested she was waiting for a guy to realize his position, and then she would gently leave. She did not do anything else. The only thing she did was nothing else. Lucian was under the impression that she was being removed from the role, the dress, the smiles that she had prepared earlier, and the business standards that she believed could protect her. This was in contrast to the feeling that she was being observed, which she experienced. Lucian was aware that she was being observed by others. Afterwards, he started talking, and despite the fact that he did not speak quickly or loudly, each word resounded in her ears, almost as if it were a jolt to the very core of her being. He did not speak quickly or loudly. A quick or forceful manner of speech was not exhibited by him. One would be proudly declaring their stupidity if they were to criticize another individual based on the color of their skin. This would be a very offensive statement. Some people could consider this to be an example of discrimination. Rather than turning around and leaving because she saw that she was incorrect, she left because she realized that there were no words left to defend the look that she had chosen to wear. She left because she realized that there were no words available to defend the look that she had decided to give herself. When she glanced back, she had just exited the scene. After returning to his seat, Ibrahim did not continue speaking because he was not required to do so at that precise moment. He did not continue speaking. There was no more conversation that he participated in. The words that he had spoken could not be heard again. Lucian did not make any form of verbal contact with her, and the only sensation she felt was a cold that traveled up her spine through her entire body. The only kind of communication that she did not take part in was verbal. Although there had been no changes in the temperature inside the cabin, it continued to fluctuate during the voyage. This was the case even though there had been no alterations reported. When the French chief executive officer, Luc Morel, entered the cabin, a white napkin was placed across his seat. This occurred immediately after I entered the cabin. Instantaneously following his entrance inside the cabin, this took place. In addition to that, a flute of sparkling wine was brought to him at the same time as the other thing. Lucian's smile was the most polished and self-assured one that she had continued to wear during the entire day. She had been smiling constantly. Throughout the entirety of the day, she didn't abandon it. Your service is being provided by the Honorable Mr. Morel, who may be found on B Avenue. In the event that it is feasible for you to take a seat at this very moment, I would be really thankful to you with immediate effect. Lucian, on the other hand, was entirely oblivious of the idea that she had just degraded a head of state in order to create a way for the same individual whose country would be evicted by that same head of state within the next month. Because of the answer, the cabin fell into complete quiet as a direct consequence of the salute. This was the direct effect of the interaction. As soon as the plane started to move in a downward manner, it started to go through the glass of the airplane. This occurred almost immediately after the plane started to descend. Over the course of the early hours of the morning, Burkina Faso gradually emerged from the darkness that had been surrounding it. The occurrence of this took place over the course of several hours. In addition to a long line of black SUVs that were parked in a flawless pattern along the runway, it was differentiated by rooftops made of corrugated metal that shone in the sunlight, trees that were coated in red mud and had been parched, and a long line of trees that had become dry. All of these elements contributed to the overall appearance of the runway. The appearance of the region as a whole was influenced by each and every one of these components with their individual contributions. During the time that everyone was getting ready for the landing, the cabin was a hive of activity, and crew members were rushing to get to their various stations with as much speed as they could. Luc Morel's raised eyebrows conveyed to Lucien a sense of preparation for a red carpet arrival. This was Luc Morel's way of showing his excitement. The perception that he was doing so was created as a result of this. He grinned and then proceeded to say, "Oh, it seems like they're here for me." He said this after fixing his tie. He smiled and then proceeded to say this. Lucien furrowed her brow. Something felt off. The plane's wheels had barely touched down when a unit of black uniformed officers marched directly onto the tarmac. Whispers rippled through the cabin. Then a high-ranking officer appeared, posture rigid, face solemn. He boarded first. He didn't stop at the cabin door. He didn't ask a flight attendant. He didn't glance around. He walked straight to seat 2. A paused, raised his hand in a formal salute, and spoke with a voice like thunder, breaking the silence. As soon as I heard the words, "Mr. President, welcome home," the entire plane fell into perfect quiet, and I could hear people gasping for oxygen on the other side of the aircraft. Given that I was looking out the window, I was able to pick up on this particular sound. A person was struggling to hold onto a wine glass that they were holding in their hand. Additionally, the wine glass was knocked over. During that same instant, Lucien did not move at all, and her fingers were firmly gripping the cushion of the seat she was occupying. In spite of this, she was unable to keep her hold on it long enough to prevent it from falling to the ground without any previous notice. Instead of getting up because he had been called, Luc Morel did so because he had not been summoned. He did not get up because he had been called. The growth in his status was due to this factor. Since he was contacted beforehand, this was unjustified. It was noticeable that his complexion became paler, and he began to stutter when he talked. At the same time, he began to stutter. Instantaneously, his attention was drawn to the person whom he and Lucien had been insulting in a covert manner during the time that they had traveled that distance. Ibrahim was still seated, still calm. He didn't look around, he didn't smile, he didn't flare with pride or rage. He simply stood, fastened the top button of his coat, nodded to the officer, and in that moment the entire business class cabin slowly bowed their heads. No one was told to. No one was forced, but true power makes the world go quiet just by being there. The metal staircase had barely touched the plane when the summons took effect. Lucien, still trying to grasp what was happening, was asked to disembark first. She walked each step heavier than the last, as if her shoes had turned to lead her. Once vivid red lipstick was now streaked with sweat. The sharpness in her eyes was gone, replaced by nothing but a vacant stare. Luc Morel, who had previously served as the well-known CEO, was the next person in line after he resigned from his post. He followed in the footsteps of the preceding person. Furthermore, he gave off the impression of being a man dressed in a suit, and he was flanked by 4 officers who were dressed in uniform. In addition, he was wearing a suit. The darkness of his face was so intense that it gave the impression that it was composed of ash. At the airport where they were both stationed, the Burkinabe Security Authority took both of them into custody and placed them under arrest. This took place at the airport. There were no huge allegations or dramatic charges. It is essential to emphasize that the message was more significant than any verdict that might have been given down. This is something that, should a full inquiry, will be carried out within the context of a legal process that is open and honest in order to determine whether or not the act of insulting the representative of a head of state was committed. This will be done in order to determine whether or not the act was committed. That day in the afternoon, the airline released a press release that stated, "We sincerely apologize for the incident that occurred aboard Flight AF. Customer respect is our highest priority, and we are currently reviewing our training protocols." The statement was made in response to the incident that had occurred on the flight. During the time that the internet was exploding, Respect Africa, he sat in two different places and Lucian needed to apologize for his behavior. It was far too late. This was a really late attempt. It was already far too late. And not only were the words worthless, but the tone was also inappropriate. In addition, the words were worthless. It was revealed that there was a small clip, and it was watched from the perspective of other passengers. It was made possible for the whole public to view the clip. Lucian's attention was specifically focused on Ibn Ibrahim at that moment. When the police were about to salute the President of the United States, a French reporter approached him and inquired about his intentions on whether or not he would press charges against the officer. Luc Morel greeted the officer with a smug smile as he entered the cabin, and at that very moment, the officer saluted Mr. President. The event occurred during a brief press session with members of African media. During this interim period, the conversation took place. In spite of the fact that Ibrahim's smile was not particularly dazzling, it held a great deal of meaning and weight, although it was a soft smile. The responses of the world. When the flight touched down, I didn't want them punished or disciplined. I did not want them to be punished as well. In my opinion, they should not have been penalized. I hope students will learn to see others as humans, not stereotypes, and use that perspective to explore the world. This is for them. I would appreciate it if they provided this item. Following that, none of the individuals participated in the discussion by providing any additional commentary. When Ibrahim Traoré arrived at the presidential palace of Burkina Faso in the morning of the following day, he did so at precisely the same time that it was predicted that he would come. The occurrence took place the next morning. There was no mention of the flight that had taken place the day before, nor was there any press coverage, interviews, or references. The absence of each and every one of these items was evident. During the meeting he called, his cabinet members discussed their goals for agricultural growth. During the course of his response to a question that was presented by a student at Awaiga University, he gave a covert smile when his aide brought him coffee that was sugar-free and that was prepared in the manner that he desired. The question that was being asked was about the several approaches that may be used in order to achieve self-sufficiency in Africa. He was responding to the specific student's question. The event was known nationwide and even internationally, despite no media coverage. This was the case, although the media did not mention it. On the other hand, Attendant Guillaume did not have to protect his place by acquiring a collection of security escort titles or by participating in power plays. Rather, he simply sat where he belonged and allowed the truth to speak for itself via his actions. This was successful in securing his position. It was in the following manner that he established his position in the organization. As an alternative to firing Lucian, the decision was reached to place him on leave instead of firing him. But the apologies were not made out of fear. They were made because the individuals finally understood that the silence of someone who is mindful of who they are will always compel others who feel they are superior to bow their heads. A new campaign that fosters diversity and respect has been implemented by the airline. Nevertheless, none of the apologies that were made at the debut of the campaign were made out of fear. Luc Morel, who was the recipient of the contract, was given the investment agreement that was the most significant in West Africa throughout the course of the preceding 15 years. This deal was presented to Luc Morel. The individual who was responsible for this achievement was Luc Morel. This powerful story reminds us that true strength doesn't need to shout. It simply stands tall in silence. President Ibrahim Traoré taught us that dignity, calmness, and self-respect can speak louder than any confrontation. Judging someone by appearance often blinds us to the greatness they carry within. In a world full of noise, sometimes it's the quietest presence that commands the most respect. Let this be a call to never assume, never look down on others, and always treat people with kindness, regardless of how they look. You've seen the world change, and your wisdom has taught us to listen before speaking and to respect before judging. Share this message with your loved ones so we can build a more humane world together. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.